The word here, Ya ayyuhan nas, O humanity, humankind. Nas is a word that the Quran uses to describe all peoples. And the Quran specifically speaks to different groups, but then when it wants to speak to everybody, it uses this word nas, meaning humanity. And the root word is the intimate ones, the people of intimacy. I mean, if you look at animals, one of the things that an animal will do in order to pretend that it's dead, it will play possum. It will expose its externals, the stomach and the abdomen area. Well, this is an area of weakness for animals, obviously, because the organs there can be attacked. And that's why most animals actually are giving their front, their chest, and then their back. And they're covering that area and protecting it. Human beings are honored according to the Quran because they walk upright. This is one of the reasons why human beings are actually a dignified creature, because we walk upright and we expose our heart to our fellow human beings. And which is interesting, armor, which is the pre-modern way in which human beings fought each other, was all to protect that area of the body that was exposed. And so we as human beings expose ourselves constantly to each other. I mean, that's what we're really doing. And that is why the root word of nas are the intimate ones, the ones who expose their feelings. They reveal their feelings. How do they do that? They do that in a way that no other creature, as far as we know, can do. And that is through sophisticated language. So we are creatures of language. And then the Quran says, and then we created you from a single soul, this androgynous soul, that contained both the male and the female components. And from, according to the Quran, that single soul came the two forms that we call Adam and Eve, Adam wa Hawa. In Arabic and Hebrew, Adam is from the earth, and Eve is a dark, Eve means life, Haya, but it also means dark and tawny, which is also a meaning of Adam, giving an idea that perhaps maybe the first people were dark colored people, and we know that is consistent with genetics, that light skin comes from dark skin, that the dominant genes are the brown or the dark eyes, and the dark skin, and the recessive are the white. So the next thing that we're told is that we were made into a plurality of peoples, of nations, of clans, of tribes. And then the Quran says, لِتَعَارَفُوا. Now, as far as I know, this is the only pre-modern example in which the reason for diversity on this planet is actually explained. I don't know any other tradition that explains this in this way. The Quran says the reason that you are so diverse is for ta'aruf. Now, in Arabic, this root means to know each other, to be able to distinguish each other, to be able to benefit from each other's knowledge. Ma'rifah is knowledge. So this idea of benefiting with knowledge from each other, because different peoples have different geniuses. And every people have been given this lead of civilization, including the black Africans who had their great time, and there's much evidence for that. The Chinese who had their great time, the Hindic people who had their great time, and continue to produce peoples of genius. All these peoples continue to produce peoples of genius. But if we look, there was a time when the dominant civilization was with those people. Now, Islam did something very interesting. And that is, and the reason I wanted to describe also contribution means to flow together for a collective purpose. So tributaries are things that flow off a river. So if you look at the river of civilization, it has many tributaries. But I believe it is one river. Now, in our tradition, we have this myth, and I really believe it is a myth. We have this myth that civilization is the Greeks, and they were extraordinary, and I'm actually a quarter Greek. And my grandfather used to say, do you know who your great-great-great-great-grandfather was? I said, who? He said, Socrates. So, I don't think he had any genealogy to prove that, but his point was to instill pride. And this is part of why it's good to know who you are, from whom you came from, in order to have a sense of your possibility, not to become arrogant, not to feel superior to other people, but actually to see what we did in the past, we can do in the present, and in the future. So there is a very important aspect in knowing our history, our people's history. So the idea the Greeks come, the Romans come, and then we have this period called the Dark Ages, and then we have this wonderful period called the Renaissance, and then the Industrial Revolution, which is really something that occurs here in England to a large extent, and had a lot of problems. And then modernity, and now we're moving into post-modernity. So the question is, what was going on in this period? Because we've got this upward movement here in the West. I mean, this is what all our books teach, but then there's this idea that nothing happened. Now, what's beautiful for me about the Islamic civilization is it's like a clearinghouse. If you know that term, it's like a clearinghouse of all of these different civilizations. So you have, for instance, the Chinese are giving to it, the Indian, the Iranian, the Sabian, the Byzantine, the Babylonian, the Greek, the Egyptian. All of them are giving to the Islamic civilization. And I use this, which is Al-Aqsa, it's the Dome of the Rock, because when this was built, very early on, only 100 years after the Prophet Muhammad, this is built, and it's really such a distinctly Islamic architecture, and it emerges almost out of nowhere. It obviously has influences from other architectures, and certainly the Byzantine is there, but it is uniquely its own. And then from there, from the Islamic world, flow to Europe, obviously, and then from Europe to America here. And then I put the rest of the world just to emphasize the idea that is generally how America and Europe tend to look at everyone else, the rest of the world. In fact, if you don't believe me, just notice when a plane goes down somewhere on the planet, they will say, 4 Americans died, often mentioning the Americans first, 2 Brits, 1 Frenchman, and several other nationalities. So, what is culture? At the root is a spiritual element, and I think that's certainly true in our Christian culture in the West. And then you have architecture, you have the beautification of life, you have knowledge, you have science, you have medicine, you have transportation, you have certainly food, which is very important, and then you have entertainment. These are all aspects of culture. Now, if you get to the most important thing that human beings do every day as a daily, in order to maintain their bodies, not their souls, but their bodies, we drink. And now, around the world, probably the 3 most common drinks are tea, soda, and coffee. Now, tea is from China, and the Chinese introduce it to the Arab merchants. It moves down into India, and it begins to spread throughout the Muslim world, and then begins to move up into Spain. And that's why to this day in Morocco, in North Africa, they drink Chinese green tea and call it gunpowder, barud. Now, the second is soda, which is from an Arabic word. Soda is an Arabic word. Bicarbonate is from sawada, and this was actually something that the Arab chemists developed. So bicarbonated water is actually an Islamic Muslim invention. Now, coffee is an Arabic word, qahwa. Qahwa is wine in Arabic. It's a type of wine. And the reason they call it qahwa, because the early Muslims, like the Mormons of today, were very worried about coffee. And they actually thought that it created a type of intoxication, not dissimilar to wine. And so several of them actually said it's prohibited. And what happened, there was a long debate, and I've read, it's very humorous. And what I'm convinced happened is they needed to try it before they made their legal judgments about it. And I think they just got to like it so much that they decided, well, yeah, no, it's halal. So the Muslims drink coffee today. Now, the Turkish coffee house shows up around 1545, which is very interesting. And it was a place where people would get together and talk. And this is, to this day, coffee is called coffee Arabica. It was discovered in Yemen. Some claim that it was discovered by a shepherd in Ethiopia, Chaldee, and you will often find different peoples vying to, the Germans claim they discovered calculus, and the English claim they discovered calculus. But no doubt, Yemen, which Mocha is a town in Yemen, so when you get your Mocha coffee, you're actually getting a coffee that's attributed to a town. The Yemeni, Abul Hasan al-Shadili, who was a Sufi, and he kept falling asleep at night. He liked to do night prayers. And he claims to have had a dream in which an angel came and showed him the coffee plant and explained how because you have to wonder how they actually thought of roasting it and chopping it and then boiling it. It's very interesting, but a lot of things are like that. So dreams are one of the means by which people learn things. And this is why today it's called Shadhiliya in Syria coffee. Now, the other story is that a Yemeni shepherd was watching goats eat these beans, and he would notice that they were a little lethargic when they started eating them, and by the end of it, they were bouncing about and felt great. So he thought he'd see what the secret was. Now, food, spice, we know this is the stuff of legend in the West. The Crusaders in 1099, when they went to the East, they discovered for the first time food that actually tasted like something. And this actually begins the beginning of European conquest. I mean, in fact, the Europeans were actually looking for ways simply to make their food taste better. I mean, let's face it. And really what Columbus was after was not gold, but simply spices. And that's why they call that area that he discovered to this day the Spice Islands. Well, all of these spices that came from the Muslim world, cinnamon, black pepper, cardamom, saffron, za'afaran, curry, and ginger, which is actually from Arabic as well, zanjabil, and many others. Now, people would never associate with Muslims sweets. In fact, unfortunately today, a lot of people associate bitterness with Muslims. But it is in fact the Muslims that gave the West sweets. And it gets even stranger because the word candy, if you look it up in Chambers' Etymological Dictionary, is from a word that means crystallized sugar, qandi in Arabic, qandi. I mean, it's an Arabic word. You can look it up in any etymological dictionary. So candy, I mean, who would have thought that candy was... Now, sugar is also an Arabic word. And again, the Hindus claim it as their own, saying that... And there is some evidence because saccharin was used also by the Latins. But sukkar in Arabic is the word that's used, and that is how it came to the West. Sugar came through Arabic, not through Sanskrit. And sukkar comes from a root word which means to ferment and to intoxicate. And obviously sugar is an important element in the process of making alcohol. So the next thing is ice cream cone. Who would ever thought that the ice cream cone was a Muslim invention? But if you look in the history of the ice cream cone, although there are two claimants, the Italians, and I'll get back to that a little later, the Italians and the Syrians. Now, the Syrian person that claims it, his name was Anas Hamawi from Hama, or what they called, it's now Hama in Arabic. He was at the 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis, and next door there was an ice cream stand, and I'll get to ice cream in a second, where that came from. And the ice cream was beginning to melt. The man ran out of plates, and he couldn't sell it. So Anas Hamawi was making a Syrian dish called zalabiya, which is a sweet bread that has syrup in it. And so he said, here, just put it in these. And so he started wrapping them, and he would give this to this ice cream seller, and that was the birth of the ice cream cone. Now, where does ice cream come from? Ice cream is usually associated with Italy. Well, lo and behold, the Italians had immense trade and commerce with the Turks, the Ottomans. And the Ottomans actually developed what was called shorbe, or in Arabic, sherbet is an Arabic name. It's not French, sorbet. It's actually Arabic. It's come from a root word sharab, which means a drink. Shorbat was a Turkish sweet drink with ice, what they call, I think, gelatino now in Italy or something, like gelato. Now, some claim the Muslims actually learned this from the Chinese. And I think that point is debatable, but there's no doubt that it was the Muslims that introduced ice cream into. And I wouldn't take too much, I mean, I don't think these are great contributions to, they've probably been great contributions to dentist associations more than anything. But they are nonetheless things that sweeten our lives, and we certainly use them to do so. Now, fruits, the pomegranate is actually pomme de granat, which is granada. It's an Indian fruit that was introduced into Arabia many, many centuries ago, and the Arabs brought it into Spain. Now, it is known that the Greeks did know of many of these fruits, like cherries and other fruits, but it was actually through the Muslims, traders, that the plants were brought into Europe, largely through Spain. Banana is an Arabic word. Banan means fingers. And this was also from India, and it moves into West Africa and comes up to Europe. It was a very useful fruit because it can be transported green and ripen over a period of time. Carez, or cherries. The Greeks knew of cherries, but again, it came to us through Spain. Lemon is a Chinese, it's a southern Chinese. Limun, it's actually a Chinese word. And then the Arabs, through the Persians, adopted it. Now, who would have thought that orange is one of these contributions? Orange is from naranj, which is a Sanskrit word to describe that fruit. And the Arabs called it naranja, which becomes naranja in Spanish, and orange in the English. So orange marmalade, by the way, is actually jama, which means collected or gelled, is a Syrian and also a Turkish way of preserving these fruits. And so orange marmalade, I mean, who would think that orange marmalade was a Muslim contribution to Great Britain? And it's just really unusual. So when you're drinking your coffee in the morning and putting orange marmalade on your wheat bread, remember who to be thankful to. God. Now, dates, wherever Muslims went, dates went. Aubergine is actually from Badinjan, which is a Persian word, eggplant. Artichoke, harashif, is also an Arabic word. Spinach is from an Arabic word. These were all introduced. Now, the potatoes. See, I want to also dispel another myth because I like to defend other civilizations as well. So I put this in here to remind you of another maligned civilization that very few people recognize their great contributions, and that's the Irish. So this is actually has nothing to do with Islam, but a little pitch for the Irish people. The potato is the least of their contributions, all right? And I would suggest that you read Thomas Cahill, How the Irish Saved Civilization, because I think many British people will be absolutely shocked at what the Irish did to really preserve knowledge in Europe. And a lot of people do not give them credit, so I'd just like a little hand for the Irish. Many of the legumes that we consume actually came through the Muslims, were introduced into Europe. Wheat bread, although the Romans, barley bread was the dominant, and oat bread here in the British Isles. And although the Romans did know about wheat and did introduce wheat, again, it was Arabs in Spain that brought wheat up into France and then England and these other places. And what's interesting to me is everybody thinks Marco Polo invented spaghetti or brought it from China. But the truth is, before Marco Polo, by 200 years, spaghetti is described as a Sicilian Muslim dish. And this is absolutely confirmed. You can look it up. So it was actually the North African Muslims that developed very thin strips of semolina that they ate. And to this day, if you've ever eaten in an Arab restaurant, you will notice little thin spaghetti-like strips in the rice. And this was actually the origin of spaghetti. There was an immense influence. The Muslims were in for about 300 years. They lived in Sicily and southern Spain and have an immense influence